Welcome to the Historical Mind. We're often sold a fairy tale version of the Middle Ages, a world of chivalry, castles, and grand tournaments. But what if I told you that world was built on a foundation of filth so profound it's hard to even imagine? Today, we're not talking about kings and queens. We're talking about the people who did the jobs no one else would touch, wading through human waste, using their own bodies as bait, and even consuming the sins of the dead. This is the disgusting reality of medieval life: gongs, guts, and guilt. The most disgusting jobs of the Middle Ages medieval world often conjures images of chivalrous knights in gleaming armor, noble ladies in flowing gowns, and the soaring spires of cathedrals reaching for a purer heaven. But beneath this thin veneer of romance, meticulously constructed by centuries of folklore and fiction, lay a world of unimaginable filth, rampant disease, and relentless, back-breaking labor. For every lord in his castle, there were 1,000 commoners performing tasks so vile and dangerous they defy modern comprehension. These were not simply unpleasant jobs. They were the essential, stomach-turning gears that allowed medieval society to function. Professions that required wading through literal rivers of human waste, using one's own body as bait for blood-sucking parasites, and even ritually consuming the sins of the dead. Forget the sword and shield. For most, the tools of the trade were a bucket, a strong stomach, and a profound lack of better options. The Gong Farmer, miner of human waste in the tightly packed, unsanitary towns and castles of the Middle Ages, where streets were narrow channels of mud and refuse, the management of human waste was a constant and overwhelming problem, with no sewer systems or plumbing, or excrement from private homes and public latrines collected in stone-lined cesspits, known as gongs. When these pits became full of foul and ever-present threat to public health, someone had to empty them. That person was the Gong Farmer. This was arguably the most foul-smelling and repulsive job in existence, a task so offensive it was legally restricted to the darkest hours, working only at night, between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. to spare the public from the horrific stench. Gong farmers would descend into these cesspits with ladders, buckets, and shovels. They would spend hours submerged, often up to their knees or even their waists, in years of accumulated, decomposing human excrement, scooping the night soil into large barrels. The physical labor of hauling tons of waste was immense, but the true danger came from the invisible enemy, the fumes. The concentrated methane and other noxious gases in these unventilated pits could, and often did, asphyxiate workers, causing them to suffocate and drown in the very filth they were hired to remove. Despite the horrific nature of the work, it was relatively well paid, a reflection of its essential nature. A Gong farmer could earn a decent living, but they paid a steep social price. They were forced to live in designated areas away from the general populace, and were ostracized as perpetually unclean, both physically and spiritually. The night soil they collected was often sold to actual farmers as fertilizer, creating a grim but effective cycle of waste and sustenance. Yet, this connection to the earth did nothing to cleanse their reputation. The job was a literal dead end, unnecessary evil that kept the cities from drowning in their own waste, performed by men who sacrificed their social standing and risked their lives with every bucket they filled. The Leech Collector, professional bloodletting medieval medicine, was a world governed, not by science but by ancient theories, chief among them the doctrine of the verhumers. It was believed that a healthy body maintained a perfect balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Consequently, nearly every ailment, from a simple headache to the raging fever of the plague, was attributed to an excess of one humor, most often blood. The prescribed cure was bloodletting, and the preferred tool for the job was the medicinal leech. But where did the learned physicians and barber surgeons get their writhing, blood-sucking instruments? They got them from the Leech Collector. This job required a unique and masochistic bravery that bordered on self-mutilation. The Leech Collector, often an impoverished woman or elderly person with no other means of income, would wade into the stagnant, marshy ponds and bogs that were the natural habitat of leeches. The method of collection was brutally simple and horrifying. They would use their own bare legs as bait. Walking slowly through the murky, parasite-infested water, they would wait for the hungry worms to attach themselves to their skin. Once a sufficient number of leeches had latched on and begun to feed, their bodies swelling with the collector's own blood, the collector would painstakingly pull them off one by one and place them in a jar. It was a profession that guaranteed constant blood loss, a high risk of infection from the dirty water and the leech bites themselves, and a miserable existence spent in the coldest, dampest parts of the countryside. They were the living, bleeding suppliers for a medical practice that was often as dangerous as the diseases it sought to cure, sacrificing their own health for the perceived health of others. The fuller, the stomper of stale urine wool, was the engine of the medieval English economy, the white gold that built churches and funded armies. The wealth of the entire kingdom depended on its quality, making the production of fine cloth a matter of national importance. But raw wool, sheared directly from the sheep, is greasy with lanolin, dirty and coarse. To turn it into the soft, usable cloth demanded by the market, it had to be fulled, a process of cleaning, degreasing and thickening the fibers. In an age before industrial chemicals, the most effective and readily available alkaline cleaning agent was stale urine. The job of the fuller was, essentially, to stomp on wool in a vat of human piss. For hours on end, they would stand in a large, shallow tub filled with freshly woven cloth and gallons of collected, aged urine. The ammonia in the urine was a powerful degreaser and cleansing agent that also helped to whiten the fibers. The fuller would tread on the fabric with their bare feet, pounding and kneading it in the foul, pungent liquid until the wool was softened and thickened. The stench was overpowering, and the work was physically exhausting. Fullers had to collect their key ingredient from public toilets and private homes, often placing large pots in public areas for contributions. This urine economy made them not just laborers, but collectors of human waste, and their constant odor made them social pariahs. The caustic ammonia would burn and stain their feet and legs, and the monotony of the work was mind-numbing. It was a profession that left you reeking of urine, with perpetually sore and stained feet, all for the sake of producing a comfortable piece of cloth. The tanner, craftsman of wrought and dung leather, was another essential material in the Middle Ages, used for everything from shoes and belts to armor and saddles. But turning a raw, stiff animal hide into supple, durable leather was a multi-stage process, and nearly every stage was disgusting. This was the world of the tanner. The process began with scraping every last bit of flesh and fat from the hide, a bloody and smelly task in itself. Then, to loosen the hair, the hides were soaked for days or weeks in a putrid solution of stale beer or, more commonly, urine. Once the hair was scraped off, the curing began. To make the leather soft and pliable, it had to be treated with enzymes. The most effective source of these enzymes was animal dung. Tanners would create a foul slurry of water and dog or pigeon droppings and knead the hides into it with their bare hands and feet, working the excrement deep into the pores of the skin. Finally, the hides were tanned using solutions made from tree bark, but the stench of the tannery, a potent combination of rotting flesh, ammonia, and feces, was so powerful that tanneries were legally required to be located on the outskirts of town, usually downwind. Like the Gong Farmer, the tanner performed a vital service, but was shunned for the unavoidable filth of his trade. The sin-eater, consumer of damnation, perhaps the most bizarre, spiritually terrifying and psychologically crushing job of the era, was that of the sin-eater in the rural fringes of England, Scotland and Wales. A powerful folk belief arose from the intense medieval fear of dying unshriven. Without a final confession to a priest, it was believed that a soul burdened with unconfessed sin could not find peace or enter heaven, and was doomed to wander the earth as a tormented ghost. To remedy this terrifying prospect, the family of the deceased would hire a sin-eater. This outcast, usually a desperately poor and marginalized individual living on the absolute fringes of society, would be brought to the side of the corpse. A loaf of bread and a bowl of ale would be placed on the chest of the deceased, absorbing the spiritual weight of their life's misdeeds. The sin-eater would then perform a solemn ritual, reciting prayers and then consuming the bread and ale. It was believed that in eating the food, the sin eater was literally ingesting the sins of the dead person, taking the full spiritual burden onto their own soul, and thus cleansing the soul of the departed, allowing it to enter heaven. For this service, they received a pittance of few coins, barely enough for their own sustenance. But the social and spiritual cost was absolute. Sin-eaters were seen as living vessels of damnation, their own souls heavy with the accumulated misdeeds of countless others. They were shunned, feared, and treated as lepers believed to be associates of evil spirits. They were only ever sought out in times of death and grief, and once their grim task was complete, they were driven away, taking the community's sins with them into their lonely, reviled existence. It was a job that required not just a strong stomach, but a willingness to sacrifice one's own soul for the peace of another. These professions, from the spiritually damned to the physically defiled, formed the unseen, foul-smelling bedrock of medieval life. They remind us that for all the periods soaring cathedrals and epic poems, society was built on a foundation of human misery, where survival often meant embracing the disgusting. The next time we imagine the age of knights and castles, it's worth remembering the Gong Farmer in the pit and the fuller in the vat, whose sacrifices made the world possible. So, there you have it, some of the most stomach-turning jobs in history. From the spiritual burden of the sin-eater to the physical filth of the Gong Farmer. Each one presents its own unique kind of horror. But now we turn the question to you. Which job do you think was the absolute worst? Cast your vote in the comments below and tell us why. We want to see which profession you found the most horrifying. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to The Historical Mind so you don't miss our next exploration of the past. See you next time.